When you stop contacting a woman, especially one who was emotionally invested in you, the first thing she experiences isn't indifference, it's disruption. Human beings, by nature, form patterns. And in relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or undefined, we find security in those patterns. The simple acts of messaging good morning, checking in after work, or sharing a laugh become part of her daily emotional rhythm. But when that rhythm breaks, even without a loud argument or a dramatic ending, her internal world pauses, because silence is louder than noise when it's unexpected. At first, this silence doesn't register as final. She may tell herself maybe he's just busy, or he'll text back later. This is the mind's way of protecting her from the abrupt emotional gap that's just formed. In psychology, this is referred to as cognitive dissonance, that mental discomfort we feel when reality and expectation clash. Her mind resists the possibility that you've chosen to step back, and instead scrambles to find rational explanations that preserve her emotional narrative. It's not just about missing your presence, it's about the loss of what she thought she understood. She doesn't just miss you, she misses the predictability, the emotional safety, the unspoken agreements of attention and care. And that's the first layer of the emotional reaction, confusion wrapped in denial. There's often no anger yet, only a frantic mental search for clarity. Then comes the emotional drop. When she finally begins to grasp that your silence may be intentional, a wave of vulnerability hits. This is where the deeper layers of self-esteem get activated. She may begin to question not just why you've stopped contacting her, but what that says about her. Was I not enough? Did I misread everything? These questions don't necessarily reflect her value. They reflect the power of disconnection to destabilize someone's inner certainty. This is where the reaction differs from woman to woman. For those who carry unresolved emotional wounds or abandonment issues, the silence can trigger past traumas. For more emotionally secure women, it becomes a cue to pause and observe rather than panic. Either way, your absence becomes an unexpected mirror. She begins to see parts of herself more clearly in your silence than she ever did in your words. And let's be honest, most women won't show you this process. She might pose as if nothing's wrong, laugh with her friends, or keep up a strong appearance. But internally, she's navigating a labyrinth of thoughts and emotions, trying to reconcile the man she thought you were with the one who now seems to have vanished. And that journey can be painful because it involves confronting a difficult truth. Sometimes, people disconnect without closure, and that says more about them than it does about her. But don't mistake that initial reaction for weakness. The silence may sting, but it also signals a turning point. It awakens a new awareness. Whether that awareness leads her back to you or away from you is determined by what follows. Because the truth is, when a woman senses that a connection she valued is slipping away, her first reaction is rarely to chase, it's to understand. And in that moment of trying to understand, she begins to transform. Because silence, though often perceived as absence, is sometimes the most powerful presence in the room. Once the initial wave of shock subsides, once she realizes your silence isn't just a passing glitch, something interesting happens. She begins to test the silence. Now, I don't mean she'll always do this consciously, but behaviorally, you'll start to see subtle signs, a sudden accidental, like on your old post, a vague message that doesn't require a response but invites one. Or she might even post content that's emotionally charged, quotes about detachment, loyalty, growth, or even heartbreak, not directed at you, but for you. This stage isn't always about direct confrontation. In fact, more often it's about observation. She's not necessarily trying to restart the relationship. She's trying to read your response, to understand what your silence really means. You see, this phase is deeply rooted in how we as humans seek resolution in the face of ambiguity. Silence is uncomfortable, yes, but uncertainty is what truly torments the mind. It creates a gap that our brains feel compelled to fill. When there's no information, the mind creates a narrative. And most people, especially those who have emotionally invested, will try to test their way back to clarity before they decide to move on. So what does this testing look like at its core? It's a form of emotional checking. It's like knocking on a door to see if anyone's still inside, not because you're ready to walk back in, but because you're not sure if it's truly been locked. Women, particularly intuitive ones, are very strategic in this phase. They don't often blurt out, "Why haven't you called me?" No, they leave breadcrumbs, sometimes so subtly that you won't notice them unless you're paying close attention. That's intentional. It protects their ego while still offering you a window. What's important to understand here is that this isn't always about manipulation or control. It's about understanding value. When someone stops contacting you, especially without explanation, the emotional system doesn't just shut down. It evaluates. Was this connection real? Did he care? Is he testing me? Or is he done with me? And so she sends out emotional signals, indirect forms of outreach, not just to provoke a reply, but to measure your absence. But here's the deeper truth. She's not just testing you. She's testing herself. She's paying attention to how she feels when you don't respond. She's observing whether the silence makes her anxious or empowered, whether your distance creates longing or clarity. That's why this stage isn't just about reconnection. It's a silent, emotional negotiation between the past and her possible future. Philosophically, we could say she's reasserting control over the narrative. She's trying to see if the chapter is truly over or just paused. And in this process, she's reclaiming her power, even if she's still unsure of what to do with it. That is why, as tempting as it may be to misread her subtle reach-outs as weakness, you must understand that many women use this period to reclaim emotional equilibrium, to test the line, not necessarily to pull it, but to see if it's still alive, if there's no response. If your silence continues, she doesn't necessarily become more desperate. Quite the opposite. She begins to accept the reality that the connection has shifted. And this is where the power begins to turn. Because once she stops seeking confirmation from you, she starts looking inward. And that's when her emotional recalibration begins. So yes, in this phase, a woman may reach out, but she's not reaching for you. She's reaching for truth. And once she finds it, the direction she chooses won't be based on how much she misses you. It'll be based on how much she's rediscovered herself in your absence. And that is when the silence stops being about you. Now, once the subtle tests fail to elicit a response, once she begins to understand that your silence is not a delay but a decision, something internal begins to shift. This is the moment the emotional energy that was once directed outward toward you starts turning inward. And that redirection is powerful, because in silence, we all come face to face with ourselves. At first, it might feel like emotional freefall. She's no longer asking why you haven't reached out. She's now asking herself deeper questions. Why does this bother me so much? What did I expect? What does his absence say about me or about him? And in that reflective process, something crucial begins to unfold. She starts separating her feelings for you from her understanding of herself. See, when we're emotionally entangled with someone, our identity often becomes partially fused with how that person treats us. When you were attentive, responsive, and emotionally present, that reflected a version of her that felt wanted, secure, significant. But when you withdrew, it didn't just feel like a break in communication, it felt like a fracture in identity. And this is where the real psychological work begins. This phase is not about missing you anymore, it's about reclaiming emotional sovereignty. She may cry, journal, dive into self-help content, or even pour her emotions into work or personal growth. Some women might try to suppress the feelings, pretending it doesn't hurt. Others will confront them head on. Either way, what's happening internally is this. She's learning to be whole again without your validation. And that is the most dangerous kind of healing for anyone hoping to return once she's rebuilt. From a psychological lens, this is the emergence of emotional differentiation. She begins to see you not as the source of her worth, but as a mirror that reflected back what she needed to learn about herself. And this is what most men fail to anticipate. They assume the silence will simply create longing, but in many cases it creates clarity. Clarity about boundaries, about what she truly values, and about what she refuses to tolerate moving forward. Philosophically speaking, this process aligns with a deeper truth. Humans don't grow when things are clear and comfortable. We grow in ambiguity. We evolve when we're forced to sit in the quiet, sift through emotional noise, and choose which parts of ourselves we want to carry forward. And that's exactly what she's doing now. She's no longer reacting to your silence. She's responding to her own truth. This is also where detachment begins. And I don't mean apathy or bitterness. I mean that gentle kind of detachment where the emotional weight starts to lift. She doesn't need answers from you anymore because she's begun to supply them for herself. She realizes that closure is something she can give herself, and that realization, it shifts the dynamic permanently. So if you were hoping your silence would leave her stuck, wondering, waiting, you might be miscalculating. Because while she may have started off confused, hurt, or even desperate for clarity, she now stands on more solid emotional ground. The version of her who needed your presence to feel whole, she's fading. And in her place is a woman who has recentered herself. And once a woman reclaims her emotional center, she no longer negotiates for peace. She becomes it. At a certain point, the silence stops echoing. Not because she's no longer affected, but because she's made a decision. That internal reflection, that emotional recalibration, it leads to a fork in the road, and she has to choose. Will she hold space for the connection to be reignited, or will she let it go completely? This is what I call the emotional threshold. Once crossed, her direction becomes intentional. She doesn't operate from confusion anymore. She acts from clarity. And here's what's often misunderstood. A woman doesn't always leave loudly. She leaves mentally before she walks away physically. The final goodbye usually happens in silence, long before the words are spoken. That's why so many men are caught off guard when she suddenly becomes cold, distant, or simply unavailable. But that shift didn't happen overnight. It was a slow withdrawal, a quiet unbinding of emotional ties that began the moment you stopped showing up. Still, in some cases, she may reach out, but if she does, it won't be with the same energy she once had. There's a different tone now. It's measured. It's intentional. She may come forward not to rekindle, but to express, to close a loop, or to see for herself if there's still anything of value left. But make no mistake, at this stage, she is no longer looking for you. She is looking at you, and that distinction matters. This decision point, this moment where she either emotionally detaches or reaches back, is informed by everything that came before it. How you handled the silence, whether you chose to communicate or disappear without regard, whether you left her in confusion or gave her clarity. Women don't forget how you made them feel in your absence. They remember what your silence taught them about you and about themselves. Psychologically, this is the moment of reintegration. She's pieced herself back together. The emotional dependence has withered, and what remains is discernment. If she chooses to walk away, it's not out of bitterness, it's out of self-preservation. She has recalibrated her boundaries, and your absence has been redefined as a lesson rather than a loss. And if by chance she does want to rekindle the connection, she does so on different terms. The energy has changed. She's no longer that emotionally raw version of herself hoping for your return. She comes back with a quiet strength, a sharper intuition, and a clear understanding of her worth. She might give you access again, but it will come with limits. She's no longer afraid to lose someone who showed her they could leave without explanation. This is the part most people miss. Silence doesn't just distance people. It redefines them. It filters emotion through time, exposing truth. And by the time she reaches her decision, she's not the same woman you stopped speaking to. She's wiser, and maybe colder, but definitely more grounded. Whether she stays or walks away, one thing becomes crystal clear. Your silence had consequences. Not just in how it made her feel, but in who it forced her to become. So if you thought ignoring her would keep you in control, understand this. Real control lies with the one who grows in your absence, not the one who hides in silence. Because once she learns to live without your voice, she never has to fear your silence again.